Welcome to this week's episode of The Climate Impact, where we bring you the latest in local weather and environmental stories from WTOL 11's team of reporters and meteorologists. From Lake Erie water quality and forecast outlooks to global climate trends, we have you covered for all your climate stories that impact you and your community.
Today, some of Ohio's bravest first responders are back home. Members of Ohio's Task Force 1 made it back safe after being deployed to respond to the hurricanes going to both North Carolina and Florida. Michael Sandlin was in Dayton today with more, speaking with members of Toledo Fire and Rescue who were a part of the deployment.
After being deployed for 21 days, to say the least, the members of Task Force 1 are tired and ready to be home. I'm told this is their longest deployment yet, working long hours searching through mud and debris, searching for the missing in 3 different parts of the country. It's been 3 weeks since these men and women have seen home. Many of them are firefighters or first responders in their day jobs, and service in Task Force 1 is something they choose to do on the side. But their most recent mission was their biggest yet. On September 24th, they were first mobilized to Orlando, Florida in anticipation of Hurricane Helene. And in the days following the storm, they worked into the destruction it left behind, aiding FEMA in search and rescue efforts. As Helene made its way north and tore through North Carolina, it left behind days of rain and mudslides all across the region. Task Force 1 was there too. In Asheville, they used search canines, boats, and specialized equipment to locate the missing. But their job wasn't done yet. As Hurricane Milton began to form off of Florida's coast, once again, Task Force 1 answered the call, returning to Florida on October 7th. They weathered the storm together, and then once the skies were clear, they returned to their rescue efforts, not stopping until the start of their return home on the 13th. Their newest task force leader, John Kaminsky, is also Toledo's assistant fire chief, sacrificing his own personal time to join this mission. He says seeing the impact they were able to make is its own reward, and has left him with moments he'll never forget.
We got to go in, make a difference, help people get back on their feet, and turn that corner, and to see neighbors helping neighbors. I don't care where we were, whether it was when we were in Tampa, North Carolina, and then Orlando area, to seeing everybody help each other, that's just remarkable. It just really shows exactly what we are as human beings, to lean on each other and help each other out.
On their journey home, Kaminsky tells me that local fire departments would wait on overpasses overlooking the highway, saluting them for a job well done. Reporting in Dayton, I'm Michael Sandlin for WTOL 11.
Hey there, meteorologist Kaylee Bowers here. There's a chance we could see a comet starting tonight. Now, this is the C-2023A3 comet starting Saturday night, October 12th, and this will be visible pretty much throughout the end of the month. But the earlier you see it in the month of October, the more vibrant it will be, but also lower on the horizon. But by the end of the month, it will be higher up in the horizon, but also a little less visible. Now, as far as this comet goes, it will be closest to the Earth on October 12th. Again, it'll be more vibrant throughout the middle of the month, but it will be appearing right around sunset time each night. And tonight may not be the best night for viewing it, as we are tracking some spotty showers, but clear skies are on the way later on into next week and also into the following weekend. Have a great night.
Welcome to this week's WTOL 11 Weather Impact. I'm meteorologist Matt Willoughby, and with the colder weather likely rolling in as we go throughout the next couple of weeks, and we start to sprinkle in even colder weather as we get closer to winter's chill, well, we think it is a perfect time to at least break down how does frost form on plants and crops. So we do have that frost potential likely as we go throughout the next couple of weeks, and we did see that this past week as well, and likely going to see those frost conditions. So how exactly does that form? So we have to definitely break down the science for you and at least help you understand why this happens. So how does frost form? Typically, if you have that temperature right at 36 degrees, and that's that air temperature, well, typically we measure that about 5 feet off the ground. But as you drop down, at least cold air starts to sink. And typically you can see that air temperature around 36 degrees, but that ground temperature about 4 degrees colder at 32 degrees. So with that, we have moisture in the air. And when those molecules and water moisture and water molecules are in the air, well, that drops down to that ground surface, and at least on contact, touch those frozen surfaces, and that's when we see those ice crystals and frost form on those plants and crops. So typically, if those crops are already at around 32 degrees with that ground being a little colder than that air temperature, well, if you have that moisture in the air, that pretty much creates at least that frost on the ground. So typically in the morning or even during the summer mornings, you'll start to see that dew on the grass. Well, that's pretty much what frost is, but when it gets cold, well, that dew on the grass will become, in fact, that frost that we do see and freeze that we do see on those crops and plants. Now, as you break this down, the perfect recipe for some favorable conditions when it comes to frost and freeze, well, you need the clear skies and also the light winds. So typically when you see those clear skies, it's going to be a colder night, but also those light winds as well, really going to help for that frost to form. If it is at least strong winds, that frost really not going to be able to stay, or those water molecules not really going to be able to stay on those grass surfaces and also on those plants and crops. But also moisture in air, that's really going to be those water droplets that helps that frost and freeze form on those crops and plants. And temperatures likely into the 30s. That's one of the main components with that, and also moisture on the ground. So you really need that moisture and colder temperatures, and likely those colder temperatures and moisture throughout the air for that mixture of frost and freeze. So typically we see our average first frost into mid-October throughout northwest Ohio into southeast Michigan. Typically around early October, you see that first frost in northern Michigan, but we're actually right on time for our first frost. Now, as we look along lakeshore areas, though, typically we see those warmer conditions due to that lake still being a very warm, and it does take a little bit longer for that lake to cool down. So therefore, those lakeshore temperatures and lakeshore areas really going to be a little bit warmer. So that's why it takes a little bit longer, at least for those temperatures to cool down and have that frost possible. So around those lakeshore areas, you'll see likely that frost or average first frost typically around late October. Now, when we talk about frost versus freeze, typically those frost conditions do develop around 36 degrees. When we talk about a freeze, that's more of that harder, at least freeze than frost. That's around 32 degrees. And we can see a hard freeze where temperatures will drop anywhere below 32 degrees, likely on 28 degrees is when you typically see that hard freeze, and that could really be detrimental to many crops and plants you do see when you do have a hard freeze. So when we talk about that freeze versus frost advisory, well, typically when you have a freeze warning, which we did have this past week, where temperatures are going to forecast below 32 degrees for a long period of time, and plants left outside it may be damaged or killed. Of course, that frost advisory, though, this means the area will likely have some frost occurring, but it is going to be at least sensitive to that vegetation, and plants will likely be left outside, maybe killed or damaged when it comes to that frost advisory. Now, we take a little bit of a climate angle to this. We're seeing at least some nights, at least night below 32 degrees. We're actually starting to see that drop a little bit. Of course, due to climate change and our warming climate out there, we're starting to see further days and further nights where we see temperatures below 32 degrees. So since 1970, actually, we've seen a drastic decrease in temperatures in nights below 32 degrees. And to time it out and pretty much fact check that, we've seen about 31 fewer days where we've seen nights below 32 degrees. We could break this down a little bit more when it comes to the climate. We're talking warmer fall nights. We've seen about a 4-degree increase throughout Toledo, that is, where we've seen warmer conditions over the night, likely less freezes, which will cause likely that average first frost to be a little later. And that's exactly what we have right now. Typically, we see the average first frost around October 4th. Well, this year, we saw it likely around October 15th or 16th. So let's break this down, at least how to protect your plants. Well, to cover your plants with at least a blanket before nightfall gets here. That's going to be a really big key to at least protecting your plants. Also, add mulch. So the mulch is really going to at least act as insulation for that soil and your plants to stay a little bit warmer, almost as if it's at least inside blanket within those plants that's really going to keep them warmer. That's the same case what the blanket does, but that mulch is likely going to be a more effective way to keep your plants away from frost. And lastly, at least bring those plants inside if you can. Typically, your house is going to be significantly warmer and also going to help with that frost conditions as well. So that's going to be a really big thing to help keep your plants at least safe and also your crops safe as you go throughout these fall months where we typically can get those frost and freeze warnings and those frost nights as we go throughout not only October, but also as we go throughout early November as well. So this is one of the key things we like to talk about around this time of year. Also, we'll have another chance of this to talk about this when it comes to springtime, when we do have those planters starting to get ready for the fall season, or at least the summer season when it comes to planting. And of course, that frost will be a danger to all those crops and plants. Thanks for joining us this week for this week's WTOL 11 Weather Impact. I'm meteorologist Matt Willoughby. Thanks for watching.
It's that time of year where these cooler temperatures are almost here to stay, but along with those cooler temperatures, clear skies and calm winds, a lot of places see their first frost and their first freeze. But it just depends on where you are. Notice over towards the Rocky Mountains, they sometimes see their first freeze in late August. And notice those blues sometime in September. And the further south you go into October, and that does include us here in Northwest Ohio and Southeast Michigan. Typically, our first freeze is in mid-October, and for us here in Toledo, our first freeze on average is around October 17th. So what's the difference between a frost, a freeze, and a hard freeze? Now, a frost is when a frost advisory could be issued. This is some damage to some plants and temperatures are below 36 degrees, but that freeze, it'll kill some plants and those temperatures are below that freezing point of 32 degrees. And this when a freeze watch or freeze warning could be issued with that freeze or with that hard freeze. Now that hard freeze, it'll kill most plants, including crops, but those temperatures are below 28 degrees, so just downright cold. Now for us here in Northwest Ohio and Southeast Michigan, our first frost, typically October 6th, but like I mentioned, our first freeze, October 17th, and last year in 2023, we saw our first frost on October 23rd, and just a week later, we saw snow on Halloween. No snow in the forecast right now, but of course, winter and the end of fall is on its way. And of course, for more weather updates, including frost and freeze, tune in to WTOL 11.
Severe drought conditions have impacted area farmers not only during the growing season, but now during the fall harvest as well. And as the harvest unfolds, we're starting to get some data that really shows how the weather has played a role in the financial impact on area farmers. We're going to be talking about crop yields in particular, and also the quality of the crops, in particular the corn and the soybeans here in the Buckeye State and much of the Corn Belt region that has suffered the impacts of the drought. So let's break down the data and the weather impact that we are tracking, and that mainly has to do with the drought that has really pervaded all of the month of September and into the start of the month of October as well. Severe drought has played a role in the fall harvest, and latest data coming in from the U.S. Department of Agriculture helps shed some light on the magnitude of that impact. The impact most significant in terms of the crop quality, which has been notably lower than in previous years. We're going to be comparing that not only to 2023, but also to the average and just how far below normal we are in terms of this year's harvest. Now, we are starting to see a bit of an earlier start to the fall harvest than usual, and across the Buckeye State, approximately 92% of all corn has reached or exceeded the mature stage. That is significantly ahead of last year, and we were at around 80% through the middle of October. Based on the latest data from the USDA, around 34% of Ohio corn has been harvested so far. Compared to a normal year that is considerably higher, in fact, almost about double what you'd expect. Typically around 18% of the corn has been harvested through the middle of the month. What about the soybeans in the area? Those have also been ahead of schedule, typically about 43% harvested through today's date, and we have seen 62% harvested thus far. Dry weather is going to provide good weather for the harvest, but unfortunately, the extremely dry weather during the growing season has had some adverse effects. The harvest is ahead of schedule, but the quality of the crops thus far has been far lower than usual. Now, comparing the fall harvest progress to where we were last year. You'll notice considerably higher in terms of how swiftly the corn is getting harvested. The percent of corn that's reached that mature stage is now at a 92%, and that's the yellow line. The red line shows you a normal year. Typically through the middle of the month of October, only at around an 80%, and it takes a couple more weeks before we pass that 90% threshold, with the fall harvest extending into the end of October and even into the start of November. So we are ahead of schedule. However, crop quality has been significantly lower than usually reported. In terms of corn, not looking at a ton that has been measured as excellent. Only 3% of corn reaches that qualification. 37% in the good territory, 41% fair, and that really is a sign of the impacts of the drought. 12% of corn is classified as poor, and 7% in Ohio very poor. Compared to where we were last year, these numbers are considerably worse. As of the middle of October last year, around 60 to 70% of corn was labeled as good. So we are seeing a much lower end of the spectrum there in terms of crop quality thus far. Looking at 2023 versus 2024, this chart is really telling. You'll notice the yellow color is this year and the red color, that is last year, 2023. A lot of that corn through this point last year was classified as good. In fact, around 70% met that standard. This year, that is well below 50%, and excellent, a very small minority of the corn harvest so far. The last couple of years, we really didn't have much corn harvest that was considered poor or very poor. However, unfortunately, that standard has been rising over the course of this year. Now, what about the area soybeans? A lot of farmers have reported what is known as pod shatter. Essentially, the very low moisture content reduces yield, and that low moisture content not only experienced in the topsoil, but also in the subsoil deep down below the top layer of soil. And that is a result of consistent weeks and weeks of below average rainfall that has adversely affected the soybean crop. Thus far, 8% of the soybeans harvested in Ohio have been classified as very poor, and a whopping 16% called poor. 37% fair, only 36% good, and very little of the soybean crop has been marked as excellent. Similar numbers comparing to last year, and we really saw things skewed in the other direction in 2023. This chart compares 2023 to 2024. Once again, this year is yellow, last year is red. You can see we had over 50% of last year's soybeans that were classified as good, and a significant amount as excellent as well. That has been a small minority of the soybean harvest this year so far, with less than 50% at good and a higher number at fair than at good. And similar to last year, that poor and very poor category seems to be growing this year as a result of the prevailing severe drought conditions. So what will farmers face in the 10-day forecast? If there's any bit of good news with that dry weather, it's that it will provide the opportunity to harvest those crops rain-free without any worries of wet fields. Unfortunately, during the growing season, the severe and extreme drought was not good news, but at least we will have dry farm fields over the next week, if not 2 weeks as well. The latest drought monitor information consistently still shows, mainly along and west of I-75, severe drought that has prevailed, and some parts of Fulton County and areas west of Toledo, stretching back towards Williams, Defiance, and Henry counties, have been upgraded to an extreme drought, and that is where the rainfall deficit is the most notable. Over the entire course of September, we only got around 3/4 of an inch of rainfall at Toledo Express Airport, and that makes it one of the top 10 least rainy Septembers on record. Further to the east, Erie and Huron counties have seen a bit more rain, although they are still marked as abnormally dry. Severe drought for the entirety of the Toledo Metro, and looking southwest along the Route 23 corridor towards Fort Wayne, that is where rainfall is the most imminently needed. An extreme drought is expected to continue, and we're looking at extreme drought in Fulton County, including Wauseon, and that stretches back north to the city of Napoleon and into Williams County as well, where rainfall has been especially below average. Across the Toledo Metro, the rainfall deficit continuing, with severe drought that has been markedly continuing over the last month or so. We're going to continue to keep an eye on the impacts on the fall harvest, because based on the data we're seeing right now, things not looking great for area farmers, and there are inevitably going to be some financial impacts due to this severe drought. We'll continue to update you in the Climate Friday newsletter. If you're not already subscribed, WTOL.com/email. We'll have the latest information each and every week. See you next Friday.
Well, someone who also returned home from the hurricane was our chief meteorologist, Chris Vickers.
Chris, good to see you. We said it at the top. Good to see you back here. Talk a little bit about the timing of everything, because we were just saying, you went down on Sunday. The storm hits Wednesday. Can you talk about kind of the, I guess, the anticipation of everybody down there at the station you worked at?
Yeah, well, obviously getting down there days in advance gave us time to prepare and really plan for what was going to be happening. Of course, with safety in mind, there was a very detailed plan about where we would go once we evacuated. We had a secondary television site that was well inland from the storm surge threat. The plans really were put into motion about 2 to 3 days in advance. We followed all the evacuation orders, and then the coverage really began around the clock. By about Wednesday, we were really in 24/7 coverage, which means shifts for all staff, whether it was the reporters, the producers, the digital, the meteorologists, were essentially around the clock with a little break at a time.
I guess you were in Tampa. I mean, that was right where Milton was headed for. What were some of like the safety precautions, I guess? Because I know a lot of people were concerned about your safety.
Right. The safety precautions really followed these to a T, and we were in a secondary site, and this is some of the video that I captured when we were entering that outer eye wall. Winds at this point were about 80 to 90 miles per hour. We had just lost power then shortly after this video. We were in a site that was secure from storm surge and well within the rating of those winds that we were expecting. Eventually, we were on backup generator power for several days after Milton hit. But leading up to it, it was really the uncertainty of where the storm was going to go. The landfall really dictated where the worst of the storm surge would have went. And if it had tracked about 15 miles to the north, Tampa would have experienced a historic storm surge just 2 weeks after Helene brought over 7 feet of water into the area. They ended up going just south over towards Siesta Key and Sarasota. They were very hard hit by the storm surge, but Tampa did avoid the worst of the storm surge.
This is a call, well, just for people who don't know, this is a call that went out. Tegna is a corporation which owns both WTOL and WTSP. They needed the help. They needed the hands-on as far as the 24/7 was concerned.
And they really did. They were storm weary after just dealing with a hurricane 2 weeks ago. So I volunteered my time and my expertise to head down there and to give them some relief. And of course, we followed all those safety protocols. I was excited as a meteorologist for the opportunity and more excited really to serve the people of Central Florida that were very wary of another storm. And it eventually did make landfall as a major Category 3 storm. And some of the stuff we were seeing going into this storm when Milton turned to a Category 5 storm and reached some of those astronomical barometric pressure readings that were sub 900 millibars, we knew we were dealing with a beast of a storm. We were fortunate that we avoided a worst case scenario. It's an experience that I will never forget, and a year that many in Central Florida certainly won't forget after their second significant hurricane in just a few weeks.
Chris, good to have you back.
Great to be back here in Northwest Ohio. I can't thank everybody here enough, and thank you as well. Many people back at home supporting me and wishing me well and sending their thoughts and prayers. Certainly meant a lot, and I'm very happy to be back right here in Toledo.
All right, Chris, thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode. You can catch any of the latest anytime on our WTOL 11 Plus streaming app, available on Roku and Fire TV. Be sure to also download the free WTOL 11 news and weather apps for everything happening in your community and beyond.